Elias had always been the quiet boy who lived at the farthest edge of Eldergrove, the kind of place where people spoke in lowered voices and never opened their windows after dark. He was 17, with pale skin and hollow eyes that seemed to belong to someone much older, eyes that held stories no one wanted to hear. The village knew his name, but not his soul, and they liked to keep it that way. His parents had died in a fire 10 years ago, a fire that had no cause and no survivors except Elias. People said he never cried once after the flames took them. They said he stood there barefoot in the snow staring at the burning house until someone pulled him away. Since then he had lived with his grandmother in a crooked old cottage that leaned to one side like it too wanted to fall away from the world. The house was covered in carvings. No one could read, etched into the stone walls, like someone had tried to trap a language that should never have been spoken. Elias never asked about them. His grandmother never explained. She only lit the same candle every night, placed it by the wooden cross nailed upside down above the doorway, and whispered a prayer that no one in the village recognized. The people of Eldergrove never came near the cottage unless they had to. Some said the land it was built on was cursed. Others said it was the blood inside Elias that cursed it. They spoke of an old tale, one that no one would repeat in daylight. A curse, they said, that lived through bloodlines, a voice that waited in the veins of certain families passed down, like a seed that would only bloom when the soul cracked open. Elias never knew what they meant, but he heard the whispers when he walked through the market, when he sat alone on the church steps, when he passed by windows that shut themselves as he approached whispers that said things like, "He is the last one," and it knows he's awake and the darkness remembers him. He never replied, never reacted. He just kept walking home, following the path that led back to the trees, back to the silence, back to the house that remembered too much. At night, the dreams began. They were not dreams in the way most understand them. They were places without gravity, faces without names, screams without sound. He saw blood moving against the walls as if trying to escape from within them, hands reaching out from corners that should not exist. A voice spoke to him every time, not loud, not angry, but calm and patient, as though it had waited centuries to be heard. The voice said his name, not shouted, not whispered, just said it as if it belonged to him, as if it had always known him. Elias, Elias, Elias. When he woke up, his body was cold, drenched in sweat. His fingernails cracked as though he had been digging through something raw and rough. The wooden floor beside his bed had scratch marks, as if someone had clawed their way toward or away from him. Once he found soil beneath his nails, another time a single thread of hair that was not his. He began to lock his bedroom door from the inside, but the dreams came anyway, and the voice never needed a door to enter. He stopped speaking to people at school, not because he didn't want to, but because his voice began to echo back to him in strange ways, as if something else was speaking with him beneath his breath, repeating his words a moment later with a different tone. Sometimes when he read his books, the letters would twist, not vanish, just change enough to carry new meanings. Things like, "You are mine and he sees you, and it lives through you." During the day when everything should have felt normal, he began to hear soft sounds from empty rooms, doors creaking open slowly, then closing faster than wind could explain. Once as he sat by the window watching the rain, he felt breath on his neck, not warm but cold like the inside of a grave, and then the voice again, right behind him. "You're not alone in here." He turned slowly, with a body that didn't feel like his, with hands that shook harder than fear allowed, but the room was empty. Yet something was wrong. Not with the room, but with the reflection in the window. It was his face, but not his movement. The reflection was still unmoving, untouched by his panic. The eyes stared at him, not with fear, not with pain, but with understanding. And beneath that, a faint smile, a knowing smile, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along, as if it knew something he did not. That night he stopped looking at his reflection. He covered the mirror with an old bedsheet and turned the glass of the window toward the wall. He lay in bed with the candle lit and the cross above him, and still he heard it just before sleep took him again. The voice calm, familiar, closer than ever. I'm getting closer. It began with time slipping away, not all at once, but in fragments. Elias would find himself standing outside with no memory of how he got there. His hands soaked in mud, the scent of wet leaves and rust filling his lungs. One morning he woke up deep inside the forest far from the village, barefoot. His shirt torn and damp with something that wasn't rain. A thick, dark stain clung to the fabric near his ribs, and his fingers trembled as he touched it. It was blood, not fresh, but dried, darkened, as if it had been there for hours. His feet were cut, the soles scraped raw by thorns and broken branches, and yet he felt no pain, only emptiness. A ringing silence in his head, like something had been speaking to him all night and had only now gone quiet. He walked back to the village, confused, cold, too ashamed to ask what he'd done, because somewhere inside he feared the answer. Over the next few days, the world itself began to shift, not entirely, but in ways that could no longer be denied. Animals started reacting to him in ways they never had before. Dogs would growl and back away when he passed. Cats would hiss, their backs arched. Even birds refused to settle near the house. The wind carried no sound when he walked alone. No footsteps but his own, until he stopped and heard a second pair halt with him. Mirrors became untrustworthy, not because they reflected wrong, but because sometimes they didn't reflect him at all. Sometimes they flickered like a broken screen, his image glitching for a second, before returning with a smile he knew he hadn't made. He avoided candles, but his grandmother insisted they be lit every night, and more than once he watched the flame bend sharply toward him, like it was drawn to something inside him, or repelled by it. Shadows lingered too long behind him, stretched when he didn't move, and once while staring at his reflection, he blinked and the reflection didn't blink back. People noticed something was wrong. They stopped speaking. When he entered the room, began making symbols under their breath and walking the long way around him. His teachers asked fewer questions, his neighbors stopped waving. One of his closest friends, Callum, who had once stayed over during storms, began avoiding him altogether. Then one day, Callum didn't show up for school and never returned home. His parents searched the woods, the police brought dogs, but nothing was found. Elias sat in his room that night, hearing the rain against the roof, trying to ignore the mud-stained shoes near his bed and the faint smell of something metallic lingering on his bedsheet. He didn't cry, he couldn't. Even when the voice returned that night, whispering, soft and slow, "You know where he is." It wasn't until the old priest from the ruined chapel came to the house that someone finally spoke what Elias had always feared. The man was ancient, his eyes gray as ash, his hands trembling as he lit the candle and placed it on the table between them. He didn't look at Elias, not directly, but his voice was steady. "You're carrying something that doesn't belong to you, or maybe it does. Now, I've seen it before. I prayed for your father when the same darkness lived in him, and I buried him when it took what was left of his soul. The evil inside you feeds off your fear. Every time you tremble, it grows stronger. If you don't fight it, you'll vanish, and it will remain wearing your skin, smiling in your mirror, walking with your voice." Elias said nothing, but inside, he was already breaking. He could feel something shifting inside him, something that didn't flinch when hearing those words, something that almost seemed amused, something that was listening too. The mirror had become his enemy, not because it lied, but because it told the truth, a truth he wasn't ready to face. Every night Elias found himself drawn to it, not by choice, but by a force that whispered from the other side. It always began the same way, his reflection matching him, until it didn't. One night he stood staring into the glass and saw a smile crawl across the reflection's face. Though his own lips hadn't moved, the smile was wrong, too wide, too calm. The eyes looked back, with a hunger he didn't recognize as his. Then it spoke in his voice, not aloud, but inside his skull, soft and slow, like silk over broken bones. "Why are you afraid, Elias? I am you. We've always been one. You asked for this when you wished they'd all vanish. When you whispered into the dark and begged for silence, you called me and I came." Sleep became a battlefield, his dreams twisted into realms of fire and rot, where walls bled and voices laughed in languages no living thing should know. He'd wake up soaked in sweat, screaming without sound, bruises on his arms, scratch marks on his chest, and once a single black feather clutched in his fist. He stopped looking in mirrors, but the reflection found other ways. It showed up in puddles, in dark windows, even in the eyes of others. A flicker, a grin, a blink too late. Shadows began curling around him, not just in the corners of his vision, but clinging to him, moving, when he stood still, breathing, when the room fell quiet. The demon wasn't just a presence now, it was a companion, a voice, a breath at his ear, a second heartbeat beneath his ribs. Then came the moment he couldn't take back. One evening, his sister entered his room to check on him, to bring him food. She touched his shoulder, and something snapped in his mind. Time folded inward, and when he opened his eyes, she was on the floor, bleeding from the head, crying, shaking. Her eyes filled with terror. Not pain, not confusion, but pure terror. She whispered his name, but it wasn't him. She was looking at, it was the thing behind his eyes, the thing that had smiled through him, and as he stood there frozen, a laugh spilled from his throat. Not his own, not controlled. It echoed too long, too loud, and carried a cruel joy that turned his stomach. His hands trembled, not from guilt, but from the aftershock of power, and somewhere deep inside the demon sighed in satisfaction. Desperation consumed him. He searched ancient books, broke into abandoned churches, lit candles he didn't understand, and traced circles in salt and ash. He muttered prayers until his throat went raw, and still the voice remained. He burned incense, clawed at his skin, carved symbols into his arms, trying to drive it out, but it only laughed louder. The more he resisted, the more it fed his fear, his despair, his rage. Everything he did made it stronger. Every prayer was a banquet, every scream a hymn of praise. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, terrified that he'd lose control again. But it didn't matter. The thing inside him was always awake, always watching. It whispered promises in the dark of what it would do, what it had already done. And Elias began to wonder if the only way to end it was to end himself. But even then, a voice answered, "You can't kill what you've already become." Elias, drawn to the mirror, force, smile, reflection, wrong. Demon, presence, companion. Sister, bleeding, terror. Desperation, ancient books, drive it out. And himself, kill what you've already become. The house was quiet when Elias returned to the one place he had always feared, his grandmother's forgotten cottage at the edge of the woods. The air was thick with dust and something older, heavier, the scent of burnt herbs, wilted roses, and ancient grief. She sat in the corner as if she had never moved in decades, her eyes clouded with time, yet sharper than ever. She didn't flinch when she saw him. She simply said, "It has begun, hasn't it?" Elias nodded, his voice broken. "It's inside me, I can't stop it." The old woman's hands trembled as she reached beneath her shawl and pulled out a torn journal bound in cracked leather pages, stained with blood, marked with sigils that pulsed with a strange heat. She opened to a page, one burned at the edges, and began to read aloud words that should have never been spoken again. "Your father wasn't who you think he was, Elias. He was no merchant. He was a vessel, a man of shadow, a devoted follower of the Ashen Circle, the cult that worshipped the hunger between worlds." Elias stepped back, throat dry, heartbeat uneven. She looked up, her eyes now brimming with the weight of unsaid decades. He summoned a soul-binding demon, a creature not meant to exist in our world. And in that ritual, in the blood he spilled, he gave it a home. He gave it you. Her voice cracked like splintering wood. "You were born in fire and screams, Elias. Your mother died cursing the skies. You didn't just inherit his blood, you inherited the pact." His breath turned cold as if the room had dropped to the temperature of a grave. No, I'm not it. I'm still me," he stammered. But the silence that followed said otherwise. The mirrors had shown the truth. The dreams had whispered it. The shadows had called him not by his name, but by its name. The truth settled in his bones like lead. There was no possession, no demon attached to him. He was the demon. Born not possessed, but created as the embodiment of both flesh and nightmare, half human, half hunger. The voice that haunted him was not an invader, but the echo of his own soul. "There is only one way to end this," the grandmother said, her voice trembling not from fear, but from finality. The circle was never broken. The only way to destroy the demon is to destroy the body it was bound into. Her eyes locked with his "you." Elias felt the room tilt. The world slowed. He was the curse. He was the blood-written scripture, the whisper in the wind, the shadow in the mirror. He walked outside the woods eerily quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The stars above seemed unfamiliar, like watchers from another realm, waiting. His hand shook, his pulse slowed. Somewhere deep within, the other voice laughed softly, mockingly. "You think death will save them," it whispered. "You are me, I will sleep, but I will rise again, in fire, in flesh, in someone new." Elias stared at the night sky and whispered, not to the demon, but to the boy he used to be, the one who just wanted peace. And with that, he made the choice the demon never expected, the one sacrifice that wasn't born of fear or pain, but love. And the silence that followed was eternal. The forest waited, cold, still, ancient. Its trees leaned like silent witnesses, their bark etched with memories of screams and shadows. Elias walked alone, barefoot across frozen soil, his breath a whisper in the air. The clearing where the curse was first born, where blood soaked the earth, and something inhuman crossed into the realm of the living, stood unchanged. Stones still circled the cracked altar, rusted chains still clung to rotting wood. The same place where his father summoned it, where Elias was forged, not born. He knelt in the center, placing the old dagger curved, blackened, humming upon the ground. No fear, no trembling, only resolve. The wind stopped. Even the night seemed to retreat. He carved a symbol into his chest, the sigil of binding, the same one in the journal. Blood ran down his skin like ink spilled on a dying script. His voice rose like a prayer and a curse. "Let this end with me." He raised the blade. His heartbeat thundered once, twice, then silence. The metal plunged deep into his chest, and his body arched in pain as the shadows screamed around him. But just before the world could fade, just before he could cross over, he heard it, a laugh, not from within but around him, cold, ancient, amused. Then black screen, nothingness, silence. The next morning, mist covered the village like a funeral veil. Children pointed toward the forest path. "Someone's coming," they whispered. An old farmer stepped forward, blinking against the pale sun. It was Elias walking calmly. No blood, no wound. Clothes clean, not a scratch on him, but something was wrong. His smile didn't reach his face. His steps were too perfect, and his eyes where once there was sorrow and soul now held only blackness. Endless, hungry, hollow blackness. A woman screamed. A priest crossed himself in horror. "He killed himself," someone whispered. But the demon stayed. It wasn't Elias anymore. It had learned from him, it had used him, and now it wore him. The village fell silent. No one approached. No one breathed too loud. The curse hadn't ended, it had evolved. Evil doesn't always die with the body. Some monsters live on in what we leave behind. Some demons wait for you to give up, and when you do, they take everything. Never surrender, not even to the darkness inside, because once you do, you never come back.